Welcome to another episode of the Less is More Sports podcast. As always, Matt and I are back with some quality information in the world of sports. Before we get into the main topic of today, I do want to say that Saturday's slate of games in college football was a wild one for sure. A lot of big upsets, and one that has me in particular not very happy. And Maddie, you already know which game I'm talking about. The Red River rivalry, Texas, Oklahoma. We had a 21-point lead over the Sooners, and we couldn't hang on. Oh, my gosh. Wow. And then
Not even with 3 seconds left.
Not even with 3 seconds left, man. And then Kennedy Brooks breaks one for 33 yards to seal it. Oh my God. That's just the type of stuff that just upsets me. But if I had to be honest, though, Matt, as demoralizing as it is to see a 21-point lead gone, there was a lot to like from the Texas fan base going forward. Our offense looks great. Our defense, the schemes are there. Players just got to make tackles. That's the big issue.
Yeah, you might want to work on that.
That
was pretty darn evident.
That one was a biggie. I'll say the schemes are there. I think you get one or two more recruiting classes from the Sarkisian, Pete Kwiatkowski era. I think we'll be fine. But, yeah, so offense is already there. It's already clicking. Offensive line's got to get better. We need that going into the game. No secret there. But, of course, Casey Thompson with another magnificent game. Bijan Robinson is Bijan Robinson. In my opinion, he's the best running back in college football, personal opinion. But obviously the big storyline coming out of that game is that Spencer Rattler was actually benched for Caleb Williams to the fans' liking. So is Spencer done in Norman?
Yes. End of statement.
End of statement. Yeah, I think.
Yes, it's over.
Just given the just tradition or not really tradition, the culture in college football right now, I think it is looking to that Spencer Rattler is going to transfer out of Norman and get a starting job somewhere else. But my thing is, though, as talented as Spencer Rattler is, if he can't make it work in Oklahoma, where is he going to make it work? Oklahoma is just notorious, and especially under the Lincoln Riley regime, of just being that quarterback building breeding ground that they have. So obviously, Caleb Williams is a very talented quarterback. I watched him play in high school, and he was one of the most talented quarterbacks I had ever seen at the time. But Spencer, this is a guy that has molded the likes of Baker Mayfield, the guy of the likes of Kyler Murray, turned Jalen Hurts into a more pro-style quarterback. If you can't make it work there, I don't know how many places there are that you can make it work.
I disagree there. The one thing I know is that there are going to be however many NCAA quarterback or teams that need a quarterback in the NCAA Division I who would be dying to have a guy like that just on potential alone. I mean, can you imagine what the Purdue's and the IU's and the UCF's and even Kentucky, God knows who else would be chomping at the bit just to get a hold of this kid just on pure potential? I mean, that's what we draft on nowadays. We draft on potential. We take shots on potential. And that kid's got potential. He just flew too close to the sun. In your preseason predictions, he was the Heisman Trophy winner. He was the national championship. You had them winning the championship.
Mm-hmm.
And with those kind of expectations it's not as odd with COVID and stuff like that, but it's probably not normal. And when you have that kind of pressure put on you from point A to point B, it's understandable. It's understandable why he would be like that. And, just because those quarterbacks we talked about, they were transferring in, they were two-sport athletes. Maybe that Spencer Rattler's just the guy it doesn't translate for. It doesn't mean he's wrong or Lincoln Riley's wrong. It just means the glove doesn't fit. And when the shoe doesn't fit or when any article of clothing doesn't fit, you take it to the Goodwill and somebody who it does fit buys it. And usually they can turn it into something really nice. And that's what I think is going to happen with Spencer Rattler. He's going to end up at a UCF, at, I don't know, you name it, Houston, UCF, Cincinnati, Indiana, some mid-tier school who's got potential, and they'll buy into his potential, and I think he'll be fine. He may not be what we thought he was. He may not win the Heisman Trophy. He may not be the best quarterback in whatever draft class he comes out in, but he'll still be fine. He'll be a fine college quarterback. He just got caught up in the hype of being part of the greatest quarterback streak that we've seen in a long time, something even Alabama can't claim. And I think that's just what happens. You got choked up on the expectations, but those expectations are going to help you get a second chance. And that's really the only thing that I think is going to happen to him.
I do agree 100% that Spencer Rattler's potential is through the roof. The kid has one of the most electric arms I've seen in a while. But here's where I disagree, Matt. I've been reading up on a lot of how Spencer Rattler is perceived in Norman, not just from the fan base, but people around the Oklahoma program as a whole. Spencer Rattler, what I've always noticed, even from watching the QB1 Beyond the Light series on Netflix, is that he's a very arrogant person. He kind of believes he walks on water and walks with his head high, and there's times where that's good. But from what I also known about him is that he believes that what's trying to find the correct terminology to use here, but he's more overconfident than what you need to be. And he's got a personality issue. And yeah, and you may be right that the glove doesn't fit with Oklahoma and that his personality doesn't fit maybe with that locker room, but with that kind of attitude, this might be a humbling experience for him, and realize too that he needs to tone it down if he's going to be able to be successful or reach anything close to the hype that we thought he would have coming out of Pinnacle. But that being said, Caleb Williams is the guy going forward. He made that very evident, and he showed all of his talents on Saturday, and I'm kind of wishing he didn't do it against my Longhorns, this might be a fan bias thing at this point, but I always feel like there's always those games where a team that one of my teams is playing, they have this young player with all kinds of potential that usually has their breakout game against a team that I root for. And like I said, maybe that's just a fan bias thing, but I remember in recent years seeing it with David Johnson. I covered David Johnson when I worked for the Sentinel News when he was still at Trinity. And then, of course, he had his breakout collegiate game against my Blue Devils. And now fast forward to Saturday evening when Caleb Williams, who I was very high on coming out of high school, much like Spencer Rattler, comes in and absolutely torches our defense. And that long touchdown run he had was just embarrassing for our defense. I don't even think he was touched. But he's got all the potential in the world too, much like Spencer. And he is the guy going forward. And I think if Oklahoma is going to take that next step and get to where I thought they would be preseason, he's the guy.
The weird thing is, we're talking about Oklahoma like they're dead in the water, but they're still undefeated in number 5 this week?
They're number 4 now.
We're talking about like we've buried them. Like this Texas game was absolutely a demoralizing experience. It was a Pyrrhic victory, and they don't deserve anything. And they're still 6-0. And in this season, that's enough. That's enough. Because everybody else is taking L's left and right. So it's enough.
You got to remember, I'm saying it's a demoralizing game for Texas because they had a 21-point lead. They had a chance to put them away, and they didn't. But you're right. Yeah. But you're absolutely right that people have just been counting Oklahoma out with subpar performances. But as to your point, they are undefeated. I think where a lot of people have jumping off of that Sooner bandwagon is that they haven't looked as dominant as they have in the Lincoln Riley era. But now, to quote a tweet from Jalen Hurts over this past weekend, season. Wow, got way ahead of myself there. But they pulled off some Sooner magic, and now they look back relatively.
Yeah, back-ish.
Defense still needs a little work. But
it'll be interesting to see how they respond in the next coming weeks because I think their schedule lightens up a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see if how Caleb Williams adapts to being in the spotlight, and if they can finally put the hurt on some teams to try to keep pace with, the few other undefeated teams that are left. Cincinnati maybe, but Cincinnati's playing. They play SMU. That's basically who they have left. They've got SMU, who's undefeated, who has Tanner Mordecai, who looks pretty good. Speaking of players who transferred, Tanner Mordecai. See, Caleb Spencer Rattler will be fine, and that's all they've got. That's all Cincinnati has left. So the committee's going to hit him for that. Georgia and Kentucky are left undefeated. They'll play each other, sort that out. Iowa, they got to go to Nebraska, which for some reason everyone's telling me is a trap game. I watched Nebraska get absolutely gobsmacked by Illinois. So you're not going to get me to bite on that because, yeah, Nebraska's not back. Say what you want about Texas. At least they win games. Nebraska, I don't think has even been to a bowl game in 3 years. Not back. So, I mean, Oklahoma's in a good spot because basically by next week, after those unbeaten teams play each other in the SEC, you're going to be among like one of the 3 premier undefeated teams as long as you take care of business. So they'll be fine. They just have to make sure the ship stays righted and they're happy with their decision.
Kentucky and Georgia will settle this undefeated thing next weekend at 3:30. But I think one of the bigger stories from this weekend as well is who's not undefeated anymore, as the number 1 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide fall to Texas A&M. And only fitting, Matt, is that Johnny Football was in attendance. However, yes, but however, what did A&M do, or what did Alabama not do for this game to have its outcome?
I think Alabama just underestimated their opponent. Texas A&M has been injury rattled. I didn't think this was going to be much of a game. I mean, they've had a backup quarterback in for the last few weeks, Calzada, and he came in and he just looked like he looked like Johnny Manziel himself out there with the way he was tossing the football. But Alabama is Alabama. They didn't when they were down 24-10, it was shocking, but you didn't think they were out of it because they're Alabama. And sure enough, they come back, they tie it, and you have to have I don't even know how that kick went in. It was one of the ugliest looking game-winning kicks I have ever seen in the history of college football, where it just kind of bowed in at the last second. So I think it was a little bit of underestimating things by Alabama, just because Texas A&M is not a playoff team. We thought they would, and we forget that a lot of people did have them in the playoffs when they were healthy, or thought they would be a contender because of the injuries and stuff like that. And plus, I don't need to tell you about the bulletin board material that Saban and Jimbo Fisher exchanged with each other with the "what are we going to beat you in, golf?" type thing. So I mean, there was billboard material there. There was a little bit of underestimating your opponent. Texas A&M has a very nice defense. They're up there with Clemson when it comes to not giving up points until, of course, Saturday night when you're playing probably about 5 future Pro Bowlers on the Alabama offense. So I'm going to grant them a pass there because you're playing basically like Julio Jones the third and Derek Ingram. I combined the running backs, and you're playing a Derek Henry the third. So I'm not going to fault them for that. But they play good defense. They play opportunistic defense. Calzada went off. He had a great game. And I think Alabama was just kind of playing down to their opponent a little bit, and they got bit in the butt. I really think that's just what happened.
I'll say Alabama in a lot of ways beat themselves on Saturday, whether it was bonehead plays or costly penalties, and which we can maybe attribute to the 12th man. The 12th man had its second largest attendance in program history. And, they were in full effect, causing a lot of costly false start penalties against the Tide. But a lot of streaks were broken in that game. Alabama's 19-game winning streak was broken. Saban's undefeated streak against former assistants was broken. And Alabama's 100-game winning streak against unranked opponents was broken. So definitely a historic night for the Aggies. And I do want to say this about Zach Calzada. It was only a matter of time before he was going to be a starter. And yes, the idealism behind him being a starter this year wasn't ideal, obviously having to come in through injury. But I watched Zach Calzada play in high school. I watched him in his Elite 11 camp. His heading into his senior year in high school. The kid can play, and he showed that against Alabama. He can play. But I think a lot of people, when he came in, were ready to write off Texas A&M, and maybe a lot of ways that's correct. But Calzada can play. Like I have full faith this kid can play, and that this game was not just a fluke. But I think that wraps up my opinions on college football, because that's not even the main focus of the podcast, Matt. We have 2 very big topics that we have to get into, and we're going to start with a love of mats, and that is baseball. And we're going to dive into the MLB postseason. And we're going to kick it off with the wild card games, in which we had two primetime matchups in both the AL and NL. However, one game happened to be a little more exciting than the other.
Yeah.
And it makes me want to freaking barf. But,
You
anyways,
had a bad week.
I did. I
You
really
had
did.
a bad week.
But anyways,
Look,
we'll get it kicking off. We'll get it started with the AL, where the Red Sox defeat the Yankees in the AL wild card. But the big story for me coming out of that game is that starting pitcher Garrett Cole, who if was signed by the Yankees for a whopping 9-year, $324 million. You sign pitchers like that with the hope that they could show up in big games. However, he was pulled after 3 innings, giving up 2 home runs and 3 RBIs. And then it just kind of snowballed effect from there. Of course, you had the infamous battles with Giancarlo Stanton versus the Green Monster. I mean, he thinks he's got 2 home runs only to go off the wall. So clearly, the Monster won that matchup. But I think that game, anytime it was a Red Sox-Yankees wild card game with a winner go home scenario, I think the expectations for this game were sky high, and it did not deliver. I believe the game was 6-1 at its final.
6-2.
6-2, yeah. Either way, it did not have. There was no parity or drama in that game at all, and that's just not what you want to expect. I know you weren't a fan of this matchup to begin with.
The one thing I will take away from this is everyone's focused on Garrett Cole, which makes sense because when you pay a guy that kind of money, you expect him to be the ace, and you expect to win those kind of games, and that's rational. But only a few people, I think, are putting the finger on the guy who signed him, which is Brian Cashman. And the Yankees under Cashman, they started out high, and they've regressed ever since. Ever since they lost to the Astros in that ALCS, they've been slowly making their way out of the playoffs with just some befuddling decisions when it comes to like the bullpen signings and the pitching signings and things like that. And that's typical for a New York market. They usually they love those big impact signings. But when you look at that team that made it that far back in 2017, the guys who were on it were like the few homegrown prospects that the Yankees had, Sanchez, Judge, et cetera, and then they started adding in the Yankee way, which is just like throwing money at people. And they didn't have a bullpen all of a sudden, and the bullpen wasn't good. And then they're signing 90-year-old Aroldis Chapman to bigger deals. And it's kind of falling apart in some ways because when you have that many guys now who are in your farm system that you've got to pay, even in a sport with no salary cap, even if you're the Yankees, you've got to make some tough cuts. And you got Gary Sanchez dropping balls occasionally that should have been strikes. He's probably on the trade block. You've got a lot of pieces here that you need to move. And it may not be flashy and it may not be glamorous, but you got a lot of pieces that you need to move in and out to get more solid overall as a team. You can have all the big bats in the world that you want. You can try to hit 50 home runs throughout the lineup. But if you're scoring that many runs, but you're giving up that many runs, or the other team has a pitcher who's just like Nathan Eovaldi, who was just lights out the entire game, you're not gonna go far in the playoffs. You'll make the playoffs probably because you'll just outscore a lot of teams in many games, but you're not going to be successful in the playoffs. Baseball in the playoffs is about pitching and defense, and if you don't have guys who can do that, you're going to be up a creek. And we've seen that regression happen over and over again with these Cashman Yankee teams. So next year, he's probably playing for his job. So it's a luxury to have that many pieces you can move, but you've got to move them for the right place. You got to move them to the right place for the right player, or you're just going to be in the same situation next year.
Enough about a game that disappointed, Matt. Let's talk about the game that actually lived up to the hype, and that's the NL wildcard game between the Cardinals and the Dodgers. And there were just stories galore coming out of this game. You had the hottest team in baseball versus the most talented team in many's eyes, the Dodgers, and it lived up to expectations. It was a 1-1 game for the entire game until Chris Taylor, bottom of the ninth, walks off and jacks a 2-run homer off Reyes, the closer, and absolutely made me sick. I was on, of course, being everyone who watched the podcast know I'm a Cardinals fan, and I was pretty much about to go into cardiac arrest half the game because I thought we could actually pull it out. And I thought we had many opportunities that we could have scored runs. But I think I'm going to start with the one, I think the one story that's was obviously going to get people talking if it did not work out. And of course, in the 5th inning, Dave Roberts pulls Max Scherzer, this is a move that we've seen Dave Roberts do time and time again. Sometimes it works out. Other times it's notoriously bit him in the butt. But what was interesting to me is that he pulled Scherzer with arguably the best player not arguably, the best player in the Cardinals hitting lineup, Nolan Arenado, up to bat. And of course, and I'm thinking, okay, if this is going to be one of those times where Dave Roberts pulls his ace and it bites him in the butt, this could be it. This is Nolan Arenado we're talking about. However, that's not how the story went. He was able to get Nolan out and Carlson out right after that. So it pays off. And of course, being the Cardinals fan, this is another reason we lost is becoming like a reoccurring theme that I'm getting very upset with. Last year in our elimination game against the Padres, a big reason why we lost is because we left 9 runners on base in the elimination game. Now transition that to our wild card loss versus the Dodgers. The Cardinals were 0-11 with runners in scoring position. If you're going to win any game in the postseason, especially a win or go home, that cannot happen. And especially with how well Tyler O'Neill, Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt, and company was hitting in that Cardinals lineup. This is the hottest team in baseball. And then all of a sudden they shut down in the postseason. I mean, it almost feels like, as a Cardinals fan, I was as happy as anyone could be with that 17-game winning streak to sneak into the playoffs. But it almost feels all for naught because being a Cardinals fan, the last time we were this hot heading into the postseason, we won the World Series. I'm not saying it was a disappointment that we didn't win the World Series, but to go out like this in a 1-3 loss or in a walk-off home run by Chris Taylor, who was the coldest hitter in that Dodgers lineup. It's embarrassing. And I just hope that going forward, the Cardinals have the bats, they have the pieces, they just have to deliver. It goes to show that baseball is not always a game of talent, it's a game of timing. It's not always how good of a player you are, it's when you make plays.
I mean, that's it. I wish I could explain all of your runners in scoring position stuff, but that's just baseball magic. That's baseball curses, baseball lore, baseball, whatever you want to call it. You may even call it analytics if you're crazy. But that's one of those things you can't explain. It's just baseball. That's the only way you could say it. Baseball is by far the most unpredictable of the American sports leagues because you just don't know what's going to happen. You can play the numbers perfectly. You can believe in analytics. You can trust your gut. And you could do anything. And you don't know if the guy who's batting 170 is going to go up there and just crank one because he likes a pitch. You can't predict baseball. You can try, but you're not going to be successful. You'll go insane trying to do that. So, I mean, I really can't explain. It's not anything to be embarrassed about. You can feel embarrassed. But, I mean, that's just baseball. Sometimes you're the windshield. Sometimes you're the bug. That's just how baseball is. It's unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. And the one thing about that game that did surprise me is that Max Scherzer looked very human in those first few innings. I was not surprised that Dave Roberts took him out because even though he didn't give up he gave up a run, but he didn't look like Max Scherzer. It didn't look like one of those great epic playoff performances you tell your grandkids about where he struck out 11 batters, yada yada yada, and movies cost 15 cents and you got a piece of gum with the reel that came with them. It's not one of those baseball lore type games. And if it's not a baseball lore type game, you play the numbers. And so that's what Dave Roberts did. And like you said, the baseball gods, as we call them, smiled upon that decision and let him get the outs. But that's really the only thing I can say about it. That's it, basically. Baseball is pure random chaos in the form of a 9-inning game played with a wooden stick. It's the closest thing we have to gambling in real life. Gambling with human bodies. Baseball doesn't make sense. Baseball doesn't exist, as the famous YouTube channel says. And that game just proves it because you can do everything right. You can put runners in scoring position. And then, like you said, the coldest guy in the lineup comes up and just knocks you straight in the teeth. And that's just how baseball is. And sometimes you just have to accept it. And next year, the Cardinals will be fine. Next year, the Dodgers will be fine. And we'll have another discussion about how this happened to the Padres because that's how baseball is. Baseball repeats itself all the time. And that's because it's been around for 100 years. It's as American as apple pie and your mother. So we just got to run with it. You just got to go with it, take the lumps, accept the fact that you made the playoffs in the dumbest league in the dumbest league when it comes to the playoffs. Take pride in that and move on. Because baseball isn't going to give you a hug on the way out. Baseball is going to kick you in the nuts one last time to make sure you remember to come back next season.
I'll say, just let me sulk in my Cardinals misery at the moment, Matt, because we all know. Obviously, you're 100% right. The baseball is the most unpredictable sport in American sports, and that's one of the reasons that October is one of the most entertaining postseasons that you'll ever find, because you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you can make that case with any sport, but baseball, it's to another level, because like what we mentioned, it doesn't matter who you have, it matters when you make this play at what time, and baseball does that better than any other sport. But
Think
obviously,
about how many wild cards have won the World Series in like the time since they've instigated two teams. You know one of them very well. The Giants, every even numbered year, did that. Hell, Kansas City, the Royals, who are an afterthought in the mind. I bet if you ask 90% of the people, average, normal people, not like us in America, who
they
the
don't remember
Kansas
that
City
Royals World Series. Yeah, they don't
Yeah,
remember
they
that.
don't remember 2015. They don't know Salvador Perez. They don't care about Salvador Perez. They don't care about Mike Moustakas. They'd probably think you were talking about the Lord song. You know, there's that's just how it is. Baseball is unpredictable, and you never know who the champion's going to be. So
Why am I blanking on the Royals center fielder that they had that year? It was really good center fielder, could really covered so much ground back there, and of course was a deep.
Lorenzo Cain,
No.
not Lorenzo Cain.
Oh, Lorenzo Cain. Yes, Lorenzo Cain. I thought you said
He's on
Franco.
the Brewers now.
Yeah,
He's a
Lorenzo
Brewer.
Cain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I forget he's got a
guys.
World Series ring.
He plays for the bad guys now. Of course, I say that because every team in the NL Central, not named the Cardinals, to me is a bad guy.
Yeah, I know. It's a Cardinal way. I know.
Yep, the Cardinal way got us into the playoffs, but it didn't get us very far. I'll say that much. But
you have to appease like some kind of god to get to the next round. You know, you have to sacrifice your child to Moloch or something.
We'll get to the teams that are actually still playing, and of course, that's gonna leave us to the ALDS, where the Red Sox lead the Rays currently 2-1 in that series, and the Astros lead the White Sox, a team that you're very high on, 2-1 in that series. So,
yeah, that was.
What are your initial thoughts on those series?
Well, the first thought about that Red Sox Rays series is that baseball needs to go back to the rule book. I don't know if you saw that. I can't even adequately describe it without getting angry. And the thing is, I can't even be mad at the umpires because they got it right. For those of you that don't know, last night in the Red Sox and Rays series, one of the Red Sox players muffed fielding a ball and kicked it over the wall. Now, actually, the umpires did get it right per the definition of the rule book and stationed runners back a few bases because, you know, you can't really call that a home run because it hit the ground and the player bobbled it over the wall. Hunter Renfroe, I'm looking at you. Get some hands, kid. But it cost
be like your NFL receiver counterpart, Hunter Renfroe for the Raiders.
Make a better play, darn you. And it was the right call to do that because they fumbled the ball. It wasn't a home run. It hit the ground. It hit the turf. He was fielding it, and he bummed fielded. But that cost the Rays some very important runs that they would have taken the lead or at least tied the game on. And that's wrong because that changed the whole outcome of that game. And instead of talking about the Rays having a 2-1 lead, we're talking about the Red Sox having a 2-1 lead going into their home field, which is just egregious in my opinion. But, you know, I understand why that happened. But I mean, the Red Sox are just, when they're on fire, they hit the ball like a team that's destined to win the World Series. But in that first game, they looked awful. to the point where I was thinking, like, how did the Red Sox even make the playoffs if they're going to come in and play like this? And yet, and that's one of those things like we talk about with the baseball magic. You remember the infield fly game? I think the Cardinals were involved in that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yes.
was a Cardinals Braves game, wasn't it? Where
Yeah,
they called
absolutely.
the infield fly rule. There is a certain amount of human error and just dumb luck that goes into your World Series run. And unfortunately, much to my chagrin, the Red Sox got that last night. They got some blessing, they got some curse, they got some form of voodoo from beyond for the Halloween season that allowed them to win that game in pretty stunning fashion. Their offense exploded. As for the other series, man, I don't even know how to describe. I mean, I know the White Sox won last night, but they won very narrowly. It was a late inning effort that delivered the win. And the two games before that were just absolute, total, utter devastation by the Astros in every way, shape, and form. Lance Lynn couldn't find the strike zone if you couldn't buy a strike zone for $5 in game one. And then the Astros took advantage of that and were just mashing the ball like they were trying to prove something. Maybe like, those cheating things. We didn't need to do that really. We were good all along. I think this is really the Astros trying to show us that we're all like a bunch of miscreant morons for doubting how good they really are, because they are just going out there and they look like a team that's going to just absolutely crush everyone in the AL to get to the World Series. And that's even the pitching. Garrett Cole may not be anymore. You still got Zach Greinke and Lance McCullers Jr. out there looking like they could easily win some form of MVP for this stuff. And I mean, yeah, I know the White Sox won yesterday, but I don't expect them to win again. This team that the Astros have put together, I think they also realize that this is probably the last great chance they have. They've already lost George Springer. They've already lost a few guys. They're probably going to lose like Carlos Correa possibly to free agency. Jose Altuve is getting old. This team, this is probably their last best chance to get that World Series to prove to baseball that cheating scandal, we never needed to cheat. You all embellished it because we're the best blanket team in the AL. And I think that's what they've come out to prove. And the White Sox, the one thing I do hope for this series is that we do get one last epic stare down and shoving match between Dusty Baker and Tony La Russa, because that's what this series needs. This series needs some energy, man. We need to get Dusty and Tony back into it, accusing each other of like hitting each other's players back in 2011, because so far Dusty is getting the last laugh, and I don't think Tony La Russa will stand for that. But man, the White Sox are just disappointing. They can't. They hit finally for the first time yesterday. And it felt like before that we had been in the middle of a great drought. Even though they had been scoring runs, it didn't feel like that potent White Sox lineup I had watched all year and believed in. And it's just too late now. Much like the Cardinals we talked about, it just seemed like the bats have been cursed at the wrong time. And because of that, I really think that the Astros are just going to come out and take care of business tomorrow, and that'll be that series. Now, the Rays and Red Sox, I think that one's going 5. That one's definitely going to go 5. I don't know who's going to win that one yet. But still, I really think that series, because of that play alone last night, is destined to go 5. That's just all I got to say. So, I mean, I'm taking the Astros now because even though I love the White Sox, there's no way in hell they're coming back from this. Even if they win yesterday, it just seems like the Astros are trying very hard to prove that they are the best team in the American League. They didn't need a scandal to prove it, and they're going to kick everyone's ass.
So I'm going to kick it off with the Boston Tampa Bay series because obviously that was the one I led with. But anyways, it's funny we mentioned Hunter Renfroe because I remember when I tricked my good friend Jacob Klugas into believing that at the time outfielder for the Padres and the wide receiver for the Raiders were the same person, and that he was playing both sports and that no one was talking about it. And he fell for it, and I will never let it down. But
that is mean.
But anyways,
That's mean.
But anyways, the Red Sox are playing their best baseball right now. And one thing that stands out to me is that for a team that's been as dominant as they've been since I really started watching baseball, this is the first Red Sox team that I really don't recognize half the roster. I mean, I know about Rafael Devers and Kyle Schwarber, et cetera, but half these guys, I'm like, okay, I don't really know much about you, but they're playing their best baseball right now. And I'm going to be honest, despite being a 92-win team, they haven't impressed me all year. But they're playing that scrappy Boston baseball that they at the right time of year. And that's what's attributed to this lead. And of course, after game one, when I'm making notes for this podcast, I was ready to talk about one of the biggest mistakes in Cardinal roster making in recent years, talking about Randy Arozarena and how good he's been and how he's pretty much a modern day like Reggie Jackson, Mr. October for the Rays. And then after game one, but then the Red Sox win the next two games. And again, they're looking like they could stretch out a run for the World Series. I mean, with how hot they're playing. But I think absolutely baseball magic, Boston magic, whatever you want to call it. But then also finishing off with the the Astros White Sox series, you hit the nail on the head. The Astros, like you said, this could be the last time that core group of players that won in 2017 gets a chance to make a run at the World Series and prove that they didn't need to cheat. And you're seeing it in the play. Alex Bregman, who had a very struggling year, is starting to come alive. And of course, they're, like you mentioned, they've already lost Springer, and a bunch of other guys are probably going to leave in free agency next year. So this could be, in a lot of ways, I know we've thrown this out way too much since the documentary happened last year during COVID, but this could be the Astros' last dance with this core group of guys. And I think you're onto something, that they're out to prove that they didn't need to.
Oh yeah.
That they didn't need to cheat to win this World Series. So this could be their last chance to prove to all doubters that they don't need to do that to cheat. And it's very disappointing as a baseball fan, just because that White Sox team is just loaded. And it's got so much talent. And for them to have those dismal performances in the first two games, I know they got the bats going last night, but yeah, like you said, it just looks like this is Houston's to win. And there's just not much parity after that.
No, it's a coronation. The NL, though, that's more of a mess than I would even care to explain.
Well, we're going to have to explain it, because that's where we're heading to now, is the NLDS, where as of a couple minutes before the podcast started, the Braves took the series lead over the Brewers 2-1 in a 3-1 win. So, Matt, what are your thoughts on that series?
The Brewers and Braves series, I thought the Brewers were actually going to win going away. You and I have seen the Brewers play. I've seen the Brewers play at times more meaningfully than you have, because at the end of the year, during those Cardinal series especially, you weren't getting the Brewers A game. You were kind of getting their, hey, we made the playoffs, let's just kind of coast to the finish line lineup. So I don't really know how much of the good side of them you saw, but watching them play Cincinnati in the early parts of the season especially, I really think the Brewers were like a World Series contender from like the first couple series. They looked like they had what it took. They found their ace, they found Corbin Burns, they have a good bullpen, and they went out and got one of the biggest free agents in trade, which is Willie Adames, who's totally revamped that lineup. He's played shortstop. He is their offensive focal point, and he makes some good defensive plays with the leather too. And then you look at Atlanta, who kind of came in struggling. They did win their division finally after going on a bit of a win streak, but you weren't sure how much of that was Atlanta winning or the Phillies and the Mets deciding they sucked again and falling off into the pit of oblivion where Bryce Harper belongs. Sorry, I had to say it. But the one thing that this series has proven to me is how important free agency actually is, because the Brewers would not be in the situation without Adames, and the Braves would not be in the situation without the flurry of trade deadline moves they made to get outfielders when Ozuna and Acuna were both hurt. And, for various reasons they've been out. Osuna's case is something I don't really want to get into, but Acuna was just tragic. And I can only imagine how good this team would be if they had him. But going out and getting Adam Duvall, getting out and getting Jorge Soler, getting Jock Peterson from the Cubs, that made a difference. It gave them some depth and it gave them some pop. And we're seeing that pop now because the Brewers do have good pitching, but they've made some pretty glaring mistakes to these guys, and they've just been taking full advantage. That's the thing about a lineup like the Braves. It's a boom or bust lineup, but when they boom, they boom. You're going to see a 470-foot home run leave the park. So that's my thing with the Braves series is I didn't think the Braves were going to put up too much of a fight. I thought they would maybe win a game, but the fact they have the lead at all is pretty shocking to me, especially with the rotation the Brewers have put out there and with the strength of their bullpen. As for that Giants and Dodgers series, now this series is definitely going 5 games. I don't think anybody would disagree with them going
No.
5 games. The pitching staffs are evenly matched. They have great superstars in the field. I can't even tell you who's going to win that game, but I can tell you whoever wins is going to have a bit of a problem in the AL. If the Braves keep playing like that, they'll probably win their 3rd game tomorrow. And if they go 5, the Braves will get some rest, and they'll be able to put Max Fried out there again. They'll be able to put whoever they want out there again. And the Dodgers are already gassed from playing a marathon with the Cardinals. They're going to be gassed from playing a marathon with the Giants if they win. The Giants are going to be emotionally and physically gassed from playing probably the best team in baseball. And this is why baseball needs to reseed after each round, because it's ridiculous that these two teams, who should be playing a 7-game series to go to the World Series, are going to play 5 games and then maybe even drop a couple because their rotation will be off because the other series just didn't go in their favor. And that's why baseball is ridiculous. But that's a story for another time. So
I'll say, anyways, starting with the Atlanta-Milwaukee series, we all know the Brewers can pitch. Statistically, they're the 3rd best pitching team in baseball behind 2 teams that I will get to here in a second. But the problem with this series to me is that they haven't gotten enough wood on the ball. They're not scoring. I mean, you look at the 2 Braves wins. They both scored 3 runs apiece. In which, I mean, that's nothing really to jump up and down about, but it's been enough because they haven't been able to, because that Brewers hitting lineup hasn't been able to produce runs. Now, all I'm going to say about the Dodgers and San Francisco series is that the winner, in my opinion, the winner of this series is your World Series champ. In my opinion, this is the World Series right now, because these, in my opinion, these are the 2 best teams in baseball. They are the 2 best pitching teams statistically. Now, I know the Dodgers are without Kershaw, but I mean, again, they have Scherzer and more depth in that starting rotation. And they've got a lot of boom in that hitting lineup. And of course, the San Francisco Giants, when I look at them, it's just depth across the rotation and across the bullpen. So this is without question going to be 5 games. This is going to be a dogfight. And I will believe that if either one of those teams doesn't win the World Series, it's just because they're exhausted from fighting each other. But I believe this really right here to me is the World Series, because this to me is the 2 best teams in baseball.
I would agree with that totally. And, like we said, it's a shame that they have to play now because of the very odd baseball scheduling, which makes the playoffs more interesting because you don't know who's going to win, but it's also incredibly frustrating because you don't know who's going to win. And usually they're playing in the round that they shouldn't be playing in because they have 107 wins. So that's just my 2 cents, but I'm not the commissioner of baseball. I can't affect it. So it's whatevs. It's whatevs.
It's whatevs, man. But given that they're both in the NL, this should be an NLCS matchup, not an NLDS matchup. I mean, in a perfect world, it would be a World Series matchup, but obviously you can't have 2 NL teams in the World Series. That's just not how any playoffs works, Matt. Come on.
That would be fun, though.
It would be fun.
Break the format. Let's just do it, man.
Let's just have the best teams in baseball just have one big playoff. That would be fun. I'd be all for that. Be like a March Madness format.
That's it. We got to take control. We got to go to wherever Cooperstown, seize the Hall of Fame until they give us what they want.
So the Cooperstown committee has to watch this podcast, and they have to listen to us and say that we want no AL and NL anymore. We just want the best teams in baseball competing for the postseason.
Or I will kidnap Derek Jeter's plaque. I don't know. I got nothing to threaten them with. I'm not very threatening.
Well, I don't know if they would unanimously be offended by that, but
hi-oh.
Had to throw that in there. I saw an opportunity. I had to seize it.
I gotta give you that's a good chance to take the opportunity right there. Speaking of things that are going 7 or I think 8 days, I don't remember. You know what starts in 8 days, Les?
The NBA season.
Yeah. Is anyone going to watch? Because we've already determined it's going to be the Nets and Lakers. What's the point? Let's just cut to that. Let's just go to June. Forget it.
It's basketball, Matt. It's always going to be exciting. I don't care what anybody says. Even if the NBA championship is predetermined, basketball is basketball. And of course, in my opinion, it is the greatest sport ever invented. I know you might disagree, but as we get into our NBA preview, I have to do the jersey flex one more time for him. And then I'm rocking my Dwayne Wade Miami Heat jersey that I've had since I was 12 years old, by the way, and still fits, which is remarkable on my end. But anyways, as the NBA preseason is going on, preseason in all professional sports, I think you and I can both agree on, never tell us a whole lot. It's mostly time for players that have already made the roster to get a couple warm-up reps, and for the odd men out to give that one final push to make a roster. However, every now and again, we do get a little something from the preseason. So have you gotten anything from this preseason?
No.
No?
No.
Short and sweet, I like it.
We'll get to the stuff that I think is going to happen when we do our top 5 that I've based a little bit of that on. But I haven't watched much preseason because, like you said, you don't get a lot of the established vets. The one thing that's actually happened that is potentially game-changing in air quotes, is that Talen Horton-Tucker tore something in his thumb and he's out for a while now, which means the Lakers will probably replace him with how long has Paul Pierce been retired? I can probably get him. So
I don't know if Paul Pierce wants to play with LeBron.
Well, still, that'll make their roster age 48, and they'll be the oldest team in NBA history, yada, yada. But the point being that, like, that's really about it. Like, the point of the preseason, just like any other preseason, is not to get hurt. You know what you're going to get, basically, from your team if you have an established roster. Yes, there have been flashes of good players and folk heroes like, Yurtseven from the Miami Heat, who's slowly gathering that cult following. Taco Fall busted out in the preseason, we know. It's a time where you create folk heroes for people who are hoop heads, who do watch basketball. But overall, it's not really telling me anything I didn't already pick up on just on paper alone. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when we actually get going. So
I'll say the two things that I've taken away from this preseason are two teams in the Eastern Conference that look really good. And one a lot of people expected to be a lot better, but we didn't know how good they were going to be, and that's the Chicago Bulls. Lonzo Ball being inserted in that point guard spot, they just moved the ball so well. And, of course, we know what DeRozan could have added. We know what Levine can do. And, of course, we know that Nikola Vucevic is the most underrated center in the NBA right now. But we didn't know how – and in a sense we still don't. But we didn't know how well they were going to put it together. But you insert a playmaking point guard or a facilitating point guard like Lonzo Ball, and he's just got the ball moving in Chicago. So I think from what I've seen, I think Lonzo Ball has found a permanent home in Chicago, and that the Bulls can make some serious noise. And, of course, I got to mention my Miami Heat. They look phenomenal. And much to the point of Lonzo Ball, Kyle Lowry is essentially doing the same thing that I just said Lonzo's doing for the Bulls. We're moving the ball well. He's playing good defense. And, of course, he can spot up and hit the occasional three and stretch the floor. So the Heat are going to be a team to watch out for. But much to your point with the Lakers, if they're going to sign anyone to replace THT, it would be, if they're going to pull anybody out of retirement, it's going to be this guy right here. Definitely more than Paul Pierce. But
still, that's a bad decision if they do it.
Yeah, I think
no, that's Wade, but he's old.
And Paul Pierce isn't.
Well, I was doing it for a joke. I feel like you're serious.
No, I think Dwayne Wade is very content with being a partial owner of the Utah Jazz right now.
Yeah, probably. He loves Donovan Mitchell too much for that.
Well, Donovan Mitchell reminds him a lot of himself, and I got to be honest, he kind of reminds me a lot of him too. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell hasn't built up the resume that Dwayne Wade has, but that's a big statement to do. Those are big shoes to fill, but very exciting player nonetheless. Well, that being said, because we don't get a lot from the preseason, I think it is time to get into everyone's favorite portion of the podcast, and that is our top 5. And I guess you're going to want me to go first.
Yeah, I always like You're the host. You deserve to go first.
Well, you're my co-host. You're equally as deserving, but whichever we feel is best. And these
Go.
are going to be our top 5 predictions that we're going to expect to see this season in the NBA. It may not necessarily happen, but something that we wouldn't be surprised if it did happen. So my number 5 is I'm going to start out with trades. And that is that Ben Simmons, Bradley Beal, and Pascal Siakam are all going to headline players being traded before the trade deadline. We all know about Bradley Beal is on the outs has been on the outs with Washington for the last several seasons. We all know about Ben Simmons once out of Philly, or he's going to sit out. But then Siakam is the interesting one, because after they drafted Scotty Barnes in this past NBA draft, it's almost like they're trying to move on from Siakam. Is that he doesn't necessarily fit this new Raptors mold, which I think is kind of unfortunate because I really like Siakam as a player, and I think he can benefit any team he goes after. But it just seems like the Raptors are looking to move in a different direction. So expect for those 3 guys to see new homes in the 2021-2022 season. Number 4 is a little bit more obvious because of who they're going to have back at some point this year, and that is the Warriors are going to be back to contending. Look, we saw the stellar showcase that Steph Curry put on last year to try to attempt to lead them to the playoffs. But now that they're officially going to get Klay Thompson back at some point this year, they're going to be back to contending. They may not be back to the NBA championship, but they're going to still make some noise in that Western Conference. They're going to they've developed some young guys through the Klay Thompson injury. You just add somebody else that can play defense and stretch the floor. The Warriors are going to be back. My number 3 is going to be the most shocking. My number 3 is going to be the most shocking. And that's that the Bulls and the Hornets will replace the 76ers and Wizards in the Eastern Conference playoffs. The Wizards is not so much as surprising because the narrative around them is that after they lost Westbrook, they've almost replaced him with a team full of misfits. Guys that people are expecting that make a bunch of jokes on social media will be playing in China next year. So, and then Bradley Beal. Well, Bradley Beal, we don't expect to stay around much longer. So it's pretty much your best player is going to be Kyle Kuzma here in a little bit. Kyle Kuzma is not leading a team to the playoffs. He'll look better than he did with the Lakers, but he's not leading anybody to the playoffs. So obviously that's the easy one. The 76ers is going to be the surprising one because they were the number 1 overall seed last year. But with me, looking at me right now, they just have no direction of where they want to go. We know what Embiid can do, but how often can Embiid play consecutive games without having to sit out or having to rest or whatever? And we all know that Simmons wants out. So what are they going to be able to get from him? If I had to make up just a preseason prediction, the 76ers just have so much dysfunction that I'm not confident of them being a playoff team. Even though they may look like one on paper, I just think there's so much dysfunction within the organization. So I would not be surprised if the Hornets replace them in the playoffs. I think the Bulls have a good chance with the Wizards. I think we all know the Bulls have a good chance to make the playoffs and the Wizards don't. So the Bulls could replace them. But the Hornets, don't be surprised. They're on the come up. The chemistry between LaMelo Ball and Miles Bridges is exciting to watch, even though it has one of the most corny nicknames I've ever heard, Airbnb.
Got to do what the kids say.
Yeah, we got to do what the kids say. But anyways, I think the Hornets are on the rise. They have their franchise player, and I think they could. And they almost squeaked in last year. And if LaMelo doesn't get hurt, maybe they do. So a full season with LaMelo Ball, I think the Hornets could sneak into the playoffs with that 8th seed. All right, number 2, and this one's going to be a long one because this is where I have my awards. So number 2 for my awards, I have Luka Doncic winning MVP. I have Bam Adebayo winning Defensive Player of the Year. Steve Nash wins Coach of the Year. Now this is a more surprising one. Malik Monk wins Sixth Man of the Year. He's a streaky scorer off that Lakers bench. Another one that's kind of going under the radar, I think Kevin Porter Jr. will win Most Improved Player. I think playing next to rookie stud Jalen Green, who is I'm just going to go ahead and say is my pick to win Rookie of the Year. I think he's almost going to feel rejuvenated, being in a new place, away from Cleveland, being rejuvenated next to a stud rookie player in Jalen Green. I think he's going to want to look to make some noise. So I think Kevin Porter Jr. has as good of a chance to win Most Improved Player. And of course, as I just mentioned, Jalen Green wins Rookie of the Year. I was more of a fan of Jalen Green than Cade Cunningham to begin with, but I also think Jalen Green is going to be in a better situation to put up numbers right away, so he'll win the Rookie of the Year. And finally, my number one prediction, and it's one that you mentioned as soon as we started this segment, and that the NBA Finals is going to be the Lakers and the Nets. But I'm going to say the Lakers win. LeBron gets his 5th ring, and he solidifies his GOAT conversation as the greatest player of all time. And that is my top 5.
All right. Pretty good list. Pretty good. Not the best. Mine's the best, but you know that already. All right. So I'm just going to start off with number 5 to see if it can shock you already. Boston Celtics are going to the play-in tournament, and they will not win. I don't like anything Boston's done this offseason. They're already having COVID issues. And I look at the teams in the East and the come-up they've had. I really think Boston is destined for the play-in tournament. I understand that they have Al Horford now, and they were good when they had Al Horford, but Al Horford is 48 years old. He could be on the Lakers. He's so old. I understand
More Lakers old jokes.
I know. I love them. Jason Tatum is good, but Jason Tatum does not a team make. They've missed on a lot of their draft picks. I mean, the best draft pick they've had so far has been Robert Williams, and all we've heard is all about outside of Jason Tatum, you know what I mean. And all we've heard about is how Danny Ainge has been stockpiling picks and picks and picks, and now he's gone. There's dysfunction in the front. There's a lot of change going on, not dysfunction, a lot of change going on in the front office. We don't know how that's going to work. I'm not high on Boston this year at all. I think Boston is destined for the play-in, and I don't think they're going to win in the play-in because in one-game situations, it's good to have Jason Tatum, but he's not the whole team. So that's my number 5, is that the Boston Celtics are going to underperform this year in ways we cannot even imagine.
I think that's actually a more common pick than you might think. I've seen that a lot. And it does make sense. I mean, they're under a new head coach. Brad Stevens moved to a general management position within there. And as you said, they've had a lot of dysfunction. As good as Jason Tatum is, you can't expect him to lead them to the promised land by himself. I think Jaylen Brown's going to have to even step up even more, which is, I feel even weird saying about it because Jaylen Brown just plays 100% every time he's on the court. But in a lot of ways, the Celtic faithful are bigger on Jaylen Brown than Jason Tatum, which still surprises me to a certain extent. But if they're gonna actually get away from the play-in game, Jaylen Brown is going to have to be that guy that Celtics fans are convinced should be the franchise guy over Jason Tatum.
I would agree with everything you said. So it does surprise me that people favor Brown, but Brown is also good. I think he'll be an all-star this year, but that's just me. That's not one of my predictions. What I am going to say is for my number 4 prediction, I also have a trade. And that is I predict the 76ers will overpay to try to get Damian Lillard at the trade deadline. I think that they're going to get desperate because the Ben Simmons situation is going nowhere and they don't have any leverage and they're going to need some kind of point guard. So I think at some point before the trade deadline, or even like maybe right now, that the 76ers are going to just beg and plead with the Blazers to send Damian Lillard to Philadelphia to team up with Joel Embiid to be like a 1-2 punch. But I predict they won't know exactly how much they're giving up because they're going to have to give up a lot to get Damian Lillard. And I don't know if it's going to go well or not, but I think they're going to overpay to get him.
If that happens, then I might have to back out of that Sixers don't make the playoffs prediction. They get Lillard, they're definitely making the playoffs.
They will, but I don't know if they'll make it as far as they'll think they will because they're going to be. I think they're absolutely going to have to gut the team to get there. So that's my thing. Number three is going to be another odd one. I don't know how this one's going to go over, but I think the Phoenix Suns are going to drop off as well. I don't think the Phoenix Suns are going to finish in the top 5 of the Western Conference. I don't think they'll be in the play-in, but I don't think they'll be in the top 5. I think they're going to have a championship round hangover. And I say this because there's already contractual disputes going on with DeAndre Ayton. Devin Booker is young. Chris Paul is getting up there still, even though he's still phenomenal. And they did lose a few parts from that team. I think Torrey Craig is on the Pacers now. That's one. He might play a small part, but he was a little bit of a folk hero in the playoffs when he stepped in. I think that there's going to be a title hangover for the Phoenix, or a championship round hangover for the Phoenix Suns, and they'll finish around the 6th seed in the Western Conference because I expect Dallas to move up. I expect all the teams up top to stay in their position, and that's really what I think is that the Suns of all those teams have like the most to lose and have already kind of overachieved in year one with Chris Paul. So that's what I'm thinking is that they're going to underperform and finish in that 6th slot in the Western Conference. Number 2, this one I think you'll agree with. I predict the Bulls are going to finish top 4 in the Eastern Conference.
Ooh, I like
I'm
it.
I'm very high on them, and the one thing that I do like about them especially is their schedule because we don't know when the Pacers are going to get healthy. When they get healthy, they'll be a tough out for them. But they get to play Cleveland 4 times a year. They get to play Detroit 4 times a year. They get a lot of bunny games because they play in that Central Division of the Eastern Conference. And we know the Eastern Conference is usually a little bit weaker than the Western Conference. And when I look at it, the 76ers are dysfunctional. The Celtics are dysfunctional. The Knicks are one of those teams where you don't know what you're going to get. They have one good year and then they disappear from the face of the planet. The Nets have issues, even though they're probably better. So I think that Chicago really can finish in the top 4 of that Eastern Conference. I think they may be behind Atlanta and Miami more so than they'll be behind the 76ers and the who else? 76ers and the Nets, though. But I really think that the Bulls are going to finish top 5 or top 4 in the Eastern Conference.
So you think the Hawks will finish above the Bucks in the standings?
I think the Bucks are still going to be the 1 seed. There's something about Giannis and his drive to not quit, to not flake out on games. That's going to like surprise us by, hey, Milwaukee's the 1 seed again. How did this happen? Something like that. And my number 1 prediction is the exact opposite of yours because I predict neither the Bulls nor the Nets are going to make it to the NBA Finals. Because it feels like we've had this discussion many times where we thought the Lakers were going to do it. We thought they were going to encounter another super team, and it didn't happen. And I can't see a lot of that changing because the Nets are unreliable. Now, if they trade Kyrie Irving for Ben Simmons, yeah, I'll put the Nets in the finals because they'll have a more complete lineup to me. But with Kyrie Irving and his esoteric nature and his vaccination thing where you don't even know if he's going to be playing in some of the games, that's a big deal because you're not going to get into a groove as a team. You're going to have a lot of questions going up. You're going to have a lot of smoke. You're going to have, and you
A
don't
lot of
want
smoke. You don't want
you're
the
going to have
smoke.
you're going to have a lot of smoke around that team. And when there's smoke, there's fire. And plus, they do have a lot of good players, but they also are older than dirt, just in the same way the Lakers are. LaMarcus Aldridge is coming back from a heart issue, for Pete's sake.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he's one of the backup players on this roster. And, you know, we all expected them to do it last year, and they got upended by a more team-oriented Milwaukee squad who came up and just upset them. And the Lakers, while they do have LeBron James last for the first time in a long time last year, showed wear and tear, and it cost them in the playoffs. And this team also has a bunch of older parts on it too. So I'd be more inclined in a tougher conference to pick one of those teams that's a little bit younger. Maybe go with a Dallas, maybe go with a Clippers. Somebody who's got some interesting depth. And I'm not trying to hate on the Lakers. I still think they're going to be a fine ball club. They very well may finish with the 1 seed. But Golden State is back. I think they've made some good adjustments. The Western Conference is still the Western Conference. And if there's one injury on that Lakers team, it feels like it could unravel the whole thing. If Dwight Howard goes down, I don't know. If Rajon Rondo goes down, I don't know. You know, that's what I'm saying. If those guys get like a not a torn Achilles, even like a ruptured hamstring, which I'm not wishing on them, it feels like that could be a major roadblock to their hopes of getting back to the championship. So I'm predicting number 1, and most importantly, that neither the Nets nor the Lakers are going to the NBA Finals.
That's a hot take. So if you had to choose right now, who would be your finals matchup?
I would pick. You know what? This is gonna shock you. I would pick the Nuggets and the Bucks.
I would be here for it. That would be a very entertaining series.
I would pick the Nuggets and the Bucks in the last series where the center position matters and big men matter more than anything we would know. That's who I would pick right now, just on who I love and who I think is going to come up. So that's who I would pick right now.
And as of right
But
now, a battle of the last two MVPs.
yes, and I think that's got something to do with it too. Those guys seem like Jokic and Giannis seem like two guys who pour into their teammates to the point where they're going to get some pure domination out of that. So that's just my thought process there. But I could be wrong, and I probably will be wrong, and that's okay with me.
But as we conclude our NBA picks, I do want to say that Bean joined the podcast just in time for his favorite sport. So he's here. He's here, and
I mean,
he just told me that we're both wrong. So
I can believe him. He seems like a smart guy.
yeah, he's a very good basketball mind. I mean, he is named after Kobe Bryant, so that usually does come into fruition. But anyways, before we wrap up the podcast, I do want to add the fact that the stand bracket is almost complete, and we are in the finals of this stand bracket. And to the surprise of, I don't know, maybe you or me, Tim Tebow did not make it.
Oh, now I'm sad.
I know that was your guy. That was your guy that you were pulling for, that the Tebow fans were going to get called out. But our final matchup for the stand bracket, and stay tuned, I'm going to actually make run the time on this poll longer than the other ones just to carry out the dramatics. But our final matchup is between his airness himself, Michael Jordan, and the notorious Conor McGregor.
Huh. That's surprising to me.
The Jordan one doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, it's McGregor mostly.
I feel like McGregor himself is worse than McGregor the fans, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that one. The fans are really a non-factor here, but I don't make the rules.
But anyways, and before we conclude the podcast one last time, final score prediction for the Colts Ravens tonight.
I don't think it's going to be nice. I'm going 28-13 Baltimore.
You know, I'm going to shock the world right here. I'm going to go 21-17 Colts. I'm going to call it right now. I got to be the odd man out.
If it happens, it would be nice, but we'll have to see.
I've heard a couple players from the Colts say that they've prepared for Baltimore more than any other team this year. Why? I have no idea, but
yeah, that doesn't make much sense, but
it doesn't. But anyways, we'll go with it. But that's all the time we have for today. And as always, in the comment section below, tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, and make sure to like and subscribe to the Less is More Sports podcast channel. So, and anyways, without further ado, Matt and I are out.
Bye.